Hallo und herzlich willkommen zurück zu einer weiteren Folge Chaos at Noah. Und beim letzten Mal, ich weiß gar nicht mehr so genau, was beim letzten Mal jetzt genau war. Also beim letzten Mal sind wir, glaube ich, mit dem Schwert zurückgekommen. Und unsere Schwester war darüber nicht so sonderlich happy. Beziehungsweise sie war dann danach darüber happy, dass sie einen Anhänger von uns bekommen hat, den wir als Geschenk beim Kauf des Schwertes obendrein mitbekommen haben. Ansonsten bin ich gerade etwas irritiert, was genau noch alles war. Egal. Thing you've... Right, Night hat Ach so, ja, wir haben uns diese eine Voicemail angehört, diese sehr komische. Aber ich glaube, die haben wir uns sogar angehört, bevor wir uns nachdem... Nee. Okay, jetzt habe ich es wieder. Wir haben eine neue Schülerin bekommen und dann sind wir aus dem Klassenraum geflohen, waren oben auf dem Dach und haben uns dann diese Nachricht, die Voicemail angehört. Und jetzt fragen wir nach, ob Grimm etwas über diese Nachricht weiß. Ich spiele halt nicht jeden Tag. Deshalb ist es manchmal so, dass ich ein bisschen brauche, um drüber nachzudenken, an welchem Punkt ich genau jetzt gerade war. Yesterday I'd gotten a voicemail with a mysterious buzzer sound. I had no idea who had sent it, and the content unsettled me for some reason, which was why I decided to try and ask Grim if he knew about it. If it was just a simple prank, I could just forget about it. Huh? Grim wasn't responding. Why was he being silent? Hello? Did you die? Still no response. Grim didn't usually fall asleep like this. In fact, this was the first time it had ever happened. If he actually had fallen asleep, then I guess I would just log off. We would meet up again later in ESO anyway, so I could just bring it up again then. But the second I thought that and began to get up from my chair, I was shifting through Edge Channel. I was looking for stuff from about your prank. Oh, so that's why he had disappeared. But that meant that even the also well-informed Grim hadn't known about the prank. But no matter how many threats or bots, I should have. So would that mean that whoever had pulled that prank had some sort of personal grudge against me? I was still curious about the true identity of the caller, but I wasn't brave enough to call them back. Wait, that's it. Since I knew the phone number, that meant I could have someone else call it for me. That way they could take the fall. The best person to do for the job would be either Nanami or Miss McCoon. Wait, Miss McCoon may have been brainwashed by the demon girl, so that wouldn't work. As for Nanami, however, I was sure I would have no trouble in asking her to do it. She would probably get pissed at me afterward, but who gives a shit? Hell, if anything, it would be good for her to suffer the tortures of society every once in a while. Alter. I thanked Grim for his help, promised that I would meet back up with him in ESO in a few hours and closed the chat. Right, as I did so, I felt my stomach grow. Man, I was hungry. Did I have any cup ramen stocked anywhere? I tried looking around for a bit, but I couldn't find any. Reluctantly, I decided to head to the convenience store to buy some. Kommt jetzt endlich die Szene mit der Unterführung, auf die ich schon so lange warte? The sun was already setting. I wanted to avoid going out late that night as much as possible, because every time I did recently, nothing good ever came of it. Unconsciously, started. Gerade geht's aber auch echt bergab. Started walking faster, hurrying down the road towards the convenience store. Today was a Saturday, so I had expected to run across a ton of pedestrians, but I hadn't encountered a single one so far. All of the stores that should have been open were closed, which kind of weirded me out. Maybe I was just confused, like maybe I had thought it was 7 p.m. and it was actually 2 a.m. Yeah, like that would ever happen. But even so, it was way too quiet. I could barely hear any of the normal city noises you would expect. The aura the city was giving off was different than usual. I arrived at the Shenzhen Station convenience store. It was right in front of the train station, and yet there wasn't a single person here either. I was starting to get more and more freaked out. The sudden disappearance of something I had taken for granted was enough to make me feel like I'd been transported to a completely different world. On a normal day, I would always avoid running into or talking to other people, but all I wanted right now was just to see another person's face. I burst inside the convenience store. There has to be someone working here, I thought to myself as I looked around the store. Calm delusion time. There's no one here. There were no customers, no any employees.
Masaka.
This couldn't be happening. An employee had to be in the back. If I were to just bring something to the register, they should come out right after. So I decided to leisurely grab a boxed lunch, pretend to flip through a magazine while I was at it, and then come up to the counter and set the box down. No one came out. Maybe there really wasn't anyone here. Fine. If that was the case, then I grabbed the boxed lunch off the counter and headed straight for the automated door. I stood in front of the door and opened it it opened up, but I was just about to step outside. An employee finally emerged from the back room. Behind the car, he was a bleary, gloomy-looking guy, most likely a college student. He leaned over the counter and glared at me with dull eyes. Nicht vergessen, das ist eine delusion. I shrugged my shoulders and walked back to the register. The employee bowed his head with a shit-eating grin. It felt like he was mocking me. I was pissed. This convenience store clearly didn't give a shit about training its part-timers. I swung at him without thinking. My very first right punch hit him square in the nose. With a pathetic yelp, he flew backwards, collided with the shelf, and then fell to the ground. A magnificent punch, if I said so. If I did say so myself. Yeah, As blood gushed from his nose, the employee got down on his hands and knees and bowed with tears in his eyes. Ja, nee, ist klar, als ob das jemals passieren würde, weil I swiped 4 of the dorayaki that were on display by the register and headed to the door satisfied. Throwing out that line to get the perfect last word, I let access to the store. Nope. Several minutes had passed while I was having my delusion. There was still no sign of any employee. I had no intention of staining my hands with 2K despite my delusion just now. That being said, I also couldn't bring myself to yell out for an employee. So I just stood there in the deserted store without moving. I wanted to believe that the employee was just taking a nap, so waited for another 5 minutes. But while I waited, no employee showed up. Not did any customer enter the store. There wasn't even as much as a sound. After enough time had passed, I started feeling scared, so I put the box lunch back on the shelf and left the store. Also, ich persönlich hätte ja das Essen mitgenommen und das Geld dafür auf dem Register zurückgelegt. I opted to go to the railroad crossing located right next to the station. From there, I would be able to see the Shenzhen station platform. There was no way a place like that would be deserted, right? That was what I hoped, but there was no one there. I waited for a train to come. Once it happened, there would be a bunch of passengers that would get off. But even if no one got off, I would definitely see people riding the train as it passed in front of me. Even after 10 minutes, the train still hadn't come. I tried to convince myself that there must have been an accident or something that would mess up the rest of the schedule, but there was no sign of any passengers on the platform. It was then that I finally realized the gravity of the situation. This was weird. This was really, really weird. That's it. I will go to Shibuya Station. There absolutely had to be people there. No doubt about it. There were people in front of Shibuya Station 24/7 without fail. I broke into a run without thinking. I ran as hard as I could. I didn't want to stop even if I was out of breath. It was probably the first time in my life that I had ever run so hard. As I ran, I hoped that this was just some sick dream I was having, but I knew it wasn't. My heart and lungs felt like they were about to explode. The pain was far beyond what you could feel in a dream. It surprised me how unbelievably fast I was breathing. And yet, no matter how much I inhaled, the pain refused to go away. As I kept running down Dogenzaka, I finally saw 107. By the time I did, my legs were already shaky. My body felt extremely heavily. Even so, I forced my feet to keep moving. I no longer had it in me to pay attention to my surroundings. The entirety of my consciousness was focused on Scramble Crossing, the symbol of Shibuya. Almost there, just a little bit farther. The second I passed 107, it would be right there. The largest in Japan. It was the place where the largest number of people in Japan came together all at once. That was why I had to get to the Scramble to scratch. Empty. That was the state of Shibuya Station, which I could see from the wide junction running in front of 107. A world without sound, a world that felt dead. A place which had always been flooded with overwhelming sound, now ruled by silence. The only thing I could hear was the sound of my own heavy breathing. I fell to my knees in the middle of the large street. I couldn't walk another step. The shock had stolen every last ounce of strength from my body. There was no one to my left, to my right, in front of me, behind me. There was no one anywhere. Even though 7 p.m. on Saturday night was when Shibuya should have been the most crowded. What was going on? This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. I closed my eyes and cradled my head. This was a dream, an illusion. This couldn't be reality. Yes, it was true that I wanted to live a quiet and peaceful life all by myself. I didn't want anyone to interfere with me, and I didn't want to get involved in anything. But that didn't mean I wanted to live in a world where no one existed. If no one else existed, who would pay for my living expenses? Wenn keiner existiert, wieso musst du dann für deine wieso musst du dann living expenses bezahlen? If no one existed, who would make box lunches for me to eat? Das ist schon eher eine Sache. If no one else existed, who would play ESO with me? If no one else existed. Yep, a wheelchair. A sound. I had heard the sound. It hadn't come from me. It had been from someone else. Someone was here. Someone other than me was nearby. I felt like I had been saved. As I had thought, it was just a coincidence. It only appeared. Like there was no one here. In truth, no one had disappeared. I wasn't the only one left in the world. I was so relieved that I almost started crying. I turned my gaze towards the sound.
君は
It was a boy in a wheelchair. Naja, Junge würde ich nicht sagen. A short distance away from me. So, still in the middle of the intersection, he was sat quietly in place. I couldn't quite figure out how old he was. If I had to guess from his size alone, I would say he looked like he was in elementary school. Oder wenn ich mich recht entsinne, war das eher ein alter Mann, aber ein älterer Mann, aber egal. He was wearing his head so low that I couldn't see his expression very well.
やっ
But
と会えたね。
we meet at last. Yeah. I could hear the boy's voice extremely clearly. It felt like he was whispering directly into my ear, which made me turn around. Of course, there was no one there.
これどうなってるんですか？
Even though he was younger than me, I ended up speaking formally to
ど
him.
うして誰もいないのか？君は理由を知ってますか？知ってるよ。
Despite how young his voice sounded, there was nothing childish about it.
僕のメッセージは受け取ってくれた？
Message? What message? I had no idea what he was talking about.
誰だ？君は。
The boy moved his wheelchair forward slightly. The wheelchair was old and it made a rusty sound as it came closer to me.
その目誰の目？でしょ？
I was confused. Why had he murmured whose I asked those eyes just now? Who was he?
早く出ないともっとたくさんの人が死んじゃうことになるから。君は一体
I rubbed my eyes to wipe away my tears, and because of that I was finally able to get a closer look at the boy's face. Also für mich ist das kein Junge, sondern sieht aus wie ein älterer Mann, um ehrlich zu sein. The boy wasn't a boy. His skin was covered with wrinkles like an old man. His cheeks were hollow. His eye sockets had sunken in to an abnormal extent. His pupils were cloudy. He had no eyebrows. And his body was small as a child's. I am.
将軍だよ。
For a moment I forgot how to breathe. My head felt like I had been struck by a hammer. The ground was shaking violently. No, my body was falling over. I shot my hands out onto the asphalt to keep myself upright. What had he just said? Shogun? He was Shogun?
忘れないで。君は逃げちゃいけない。
I lifted up my head and watched as Shogun, who had already turned his back to me, left Scramble Crossing. His wheelchair was getting farther and farther away, making a creaking sound as it moved. The thought of chasing after him and pressing him for answers didn't even cross my mind. I didn't think of running up and punching him in the face or for dragging me into this either. I wasn't even remotely confrontational. I wasn't even remotely a confrontational person. My head started to hurt. The area around my temples throbbed with pain, still cowering on the spot. I tried to endure it. In the world without sound, a discordant noise began to spread, an all-encompassing static. Whose voice was it? Remy! Whose eyes are those? Don't look at me. What had previously been just a random discordant mess of garbled static gradually turned into a reverse. Someone gently placed a hand on my shoulder.
邪魔なんだっつうの。何してんだろうね。
最近の若いもんは
なんかのパフォーマンスじゃないの？
タク。
While still trying to endure the pain of my headache, I looked up. Remy! The demon girl, Remy, was peering at my face as she stood over me. Eyes that were clear and full of life. Eyes that looked at me and only me. Again, this girl had appeared out of nowhere once again.
歩いて。
She wrapped her hand under my arm and tried to make me stand up. I shrieked and shook her off. I came to my senses and looked around. I was still in the middle of the street, but it wasn't deserted anymore. There were people around me in every direction, working every which way without paying me any mind. Remy, with a face that looked like she was about to cry, reached out to me once more.
私の言うことを聞いて。夜だ!
When I screamed, the throbbing in my head transformed into intense stabbing pain. Even so, I ignored it, scrambling back on all fours to try and get away from Remy.
お前だろ。お前が見せたんだ。お前の妄想だ。僕の心を支配して精神攻撃を。この悪魔め。お前なんて剣で殺してやる。ベースに帰れば僕には理想。
An abrupt impact ran through my cheek. It stung with pain, and it began to heat up. She had slapped me. She was going to kill me once and for all. Screwing back on all fours, I tried as hard as I could to escape with my life. But Remy quickly grabbed my hand with strength I never thought a girl could have. She pulled me toward her. Naja, ich sag mal so, du hast nicht gerade viel Stärke, also es ist nicht so wunderlich, dass ein Mädchen potenziell mehr Kraft hat als du. Oh. And embraced me. Her soft form gently enveloped my own. It was so warm. I could smell a tiny hint of sweat. Her silky hair tickled the tip of my nose.
しっかりして。
With such an anticlimax, my whole body felt like it was about to give
ここ
out.
にいたら危ないよ。
Her voice was slightly shaky. I couldn't tell if she was crying or
信号
not.
赤になっちゃってるから。
Because the light is turning red. Mitten auf einer Kreuzung ist das nicht so optimal. I was confused. Was she not going to kill me? Why was she helping me? The hallucination from before where all of the people of Shibuya disappeared. It wasn't something she had forced me to see. When I felt such a kind, gentle warmth. When she had embraced me so innocently. It shook everything I had believed up until that point. Could it be that Sakihata Rimi wasn't actually a demon at all? Or was it foolish to believe that? What if this was just a cunning way to deceive me? Regardless, one thing was sure. With Rimi hugging me, I felt an incredible sense of relief. I had no idea what to call such a strange sensation. Upon letting go of me, Rumi put my face between her hands, then stared at me once again. Her eyes were slightly red.
お願い。今は私についてきていい？
For some reason I nodded. We were standing still alone in the middle of the empty intersection. A number of people on the sidewalk waiting for the pedestrian signal to change were watching us closely. We could hear a few people laughing and here and there. Many cars had their headlights trained at us and were starting to honk their horns. Rumi grabbed my hand tightly and started running towards the sidewalk. She pulled me along with her hand and I followed. With countless horns blaring at us, we made it to the sidewalk. Rumi breathed a sigh of relief and stopped. My hand was still in hers. Just being held in this way made my heart feel more and more at ease. I wanted to submit myself to this feeling. I wanted to stay like this forever. Rumi turned back in my direction.
無事でよかったね。
She smiled an incredibly happy smile. I didn't know whether it was real an act or what exactly it was. But
話してよ。
because I had been so hostile to her until now, because I had thought of her as a demon until now, I let her win me over like this. I felt like I had ceased being myself.
ごめんごめん。
She quickly let go of my hand.
それにしてもびっくりした。タクが道の真ん中でうずくまってるんだもん。信号が赤になった時はどうなることかと。
I turned my back to Remy as she started talking cheerfully. I walked off, pushing my way through the crowd of people.
帰る。
じゃあ送るよ。具合悪いんでしょ。
Her voice chased me from behind, but I shook my head in refusal. The cheerfulness from before had vanished from her voice. I felt terrible considering how much she had done to help me, so I
ありがとう。
barely managed to squeeze out those words. To think that the three investigative divisions would actually be merged into one. Staring at the detectives gathered in the Shibuya Police Department conference room, Ban Yashui thought that to himself. The Inokashira Line Shibuya Station public bathroom homicide case, or as the media called it to amuse themselves, the vampire case, had caused an increasingly serious drop in manpower. When 3 brutal murders occurred within the same jurisdiction within the same period of time, the possibility of a single perpetrator became more and more evident. A suggestion had been raised that the Cornelius Tower mass suicide case be handled by the Juvenile Division, but since the media had been treating it as a part of New Gen, there was a possibility that if the police treated the case differently, they would be subjected to criticism. Toll. Therefore, it was only natural that the Central Police had chosen the only remaining option, to merge the several investigation headquarters. With this integration now in place, the group was reviewing the series of New Gen cases one by one. The projection screen at the front of the conference room displayed a series of photographs of the crime scenes, one after the other. Silver had been chosen towards the presentation. He had stayed up all last night going over the documents endlessly. Good work, Ben muttered internally, chin resting in his hands.
コーネリアスタワー集団投身自殺事件の発生は9月7日っす。です。ニュージェネとマスコミが呼称している4つの事件の中では一番最初に発生してます。午後11時半ごろ、渋谷コーネリアスタワー屋上のヘリポートから男女5人が転落、全員死亡しました。5人は全員未成年の高校生、男が3人、女が2人。ただし5人のうち男女1人ずつだけが同じ学校なだけで、それ以外の3人はいずれも別の学校でした。5人それぞれの爪の間にわずかな肉片が残っており、手のひらに引っかき傷があったことが司法解剖で判明しました。そこから5人は互いに手をつないだ状態で転落したと推測されます。屋上には遺書らしきものはなし。被害者5人は学校帰りに待ち合わせてコーネリアスタワーへ向かったようです。なお、事件性があることを示す根拠としては、コーネリアスタワー屋上が関係者以外立ち入り禁止であったことが挙げられます。事件があった時間、屋上への扉は施錠されており、その扉のドアノブに被害者5人の指紋は付着してませんでした。また、5人の遺品からも扉の鍵は見つかっていません。このことから被害者以外の第三者が事件前後にその現場にいた可能性があります。その第三者が扉の鍵を持っており、事件前あるいは事件後に鍵を閉めて立ち去ったという線で捜査を続けています。コーネリアスタワーのホテル従業員全員への聞き取り調査は終了。ほぼ全員にアリバイがありました。今はタワーに入っている企業の社員に話を聞いているところです。被害者たち5人には今のところ自殺する理由は見つかっていません。家族、友人、学校の教師など5人中4人の関係者が口を揃えて自殺する理由などないと断言しています。
The slideshow weapon into a picture of second case, Shibuya Station, Undergrade and Fetus Homicide Case. Aber ich würde sagen, bevor das macht, würde ich an dem Punkt erstmal die Folge beenden. Und dann in der nächsten Folge mit der Aufarbeitung der Fälle weitermachen. Vielen Dank fürs Zuschauen und bis zum nächsten Mal. Ciao.